to the 80s, the decade that made us, episode 3, Choices. I'm your host, Rachel, and on this excellent part of the film series, we will discuss the most important events that occurred during the 1980s and how the choices that people made are what made us what we are today. The first story on the list is the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan.
On March 30th, 1981, Ronald Reagan and 3 others were shot and wounded by John Hinckley Jr. This occurred when they were leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Nobody was killed in the attack, but Press Secretary James Brady and police officers Thomas Delahanty and Timothy McCarthy had been injured also.
I don't remember exactly what happened, but what I've been told seems to be accurate. President Ronald Reagan just finished giving a speech, and as he left the hotel and waved to the people gathered outside, almost immediately after Hinckley fired his first shot, President Reagan was shot in the chest, and the bullet punctured his lung and lodged itself 1 inch from his heart. Luckily, he recovered quickly. Later, when I awoke in the hospital, I learned what had happened. I was totally wigging. President Johnson, Thomas Delahanty, and Timothy McCarthy had all been shot, but not seriously injured, but I had been shot in the head and permanently disabled.
Although severely wounded by a bullet, Ronald Reagan was still able to make a rad joke by saying, "I hope you're all Republicans," to the surgeons before his surgery. After the incident, Hinckley was found innocent by reason of insanity. On January 28, 1986, the shuttle program would be changed forever. The plan was to send 7 astronauts, including 1 teacher, up into space. Then, on that fateful morning, after only 73 seconds of flight, the shuttle exploded.
Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
It's always amazing to hear how quickly the shuttle moves. It's already more than 4 miles downwind, as we just
Engines
heard.
throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Roger, go with throttle up.
This shuttle mission will launch.
1 minute 15
There's been an
seconds.
explosion.
Velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
This is not standard. This is not something that is planned, of course.
What really caused the incident was that 2 rubber O-rings had failed due to the cold weather that morning. The O-rings had been designed to separate the sections of the rocket booster. The failure caused a breach in the joint it sealed, which allowed pressurized hot gas from the rocket motor to reach the outside. This led to structural failure of the external tank, and aerodynamic forces broke up the orbiter.
I remember that day like it was yesterday. My class was so stoked for Mrs. McAuliffe. I mean, the first teacher in space, that's tubular. We had the TV on the classroom to watch the launch. Nobody could have ever guessed what was about to happen. We saw the shuttle launch, and everyone was so nervous and excited to have Mrs. McAuliffe teach us about outer space. We watched as the shuttle went higher and higher and farther away from the launch pad. Then only 73 seconds after the launch, it exploded. It was so grody. Our stomachs were filled with dread. Watching the explosion take place on live television was a lot for everyone to handle. It was just as hard to believe we'd never see our teacher again.
Technically, what you just saw wasn't the first cell phone, but actually the first handheld mobile phone. The Motorola Dynatec 8000X, such a revolutionary gadget, was first introduced by the company Motorola in 1984.
Oh yes, the Dynatec. That was indeed an accomplishment. I remember when we first introduced the wicked device. It was so big. Literally. It was 13 by 1 3/4 by 3.5 inches and weighed around 28 ounces. We rightly nicknamed it the Brick. It had a price of $3,995, and on March 13th, someone actually bought it. I mean, today that would be around $9,000. Really though, a handheld phone like that was considered a gimmick. Look at what I've got kind of toy. We are also astounded at how totally fresh and widely used the cell phone is today. Hey kid, are you tired of easy jigsaw puzzles?
Yeah!
Do you want a real challenge?
Yeah!
Then try this.
Whoa, what is it? It's so rad!
It's the new righteous Rubik's Cube by Ideal. The Rubik's Cube is a new addicting puzzle that, once you pick it up, you'll never want to put it down. The Rubik's Cube. Over 3 billion combinations, but only one right answer. Can you solve the cube?
This bogus accident occurred on April 22nd, 1986. It is the worst nuclear power plant accident in history in terms of cost and resulting deaths. It was also classified as a Level 7 event, which is the maximum classification on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The Chernobyl station was located about 65 miles from Kyiv, Ukraine. It all started on April 25th when a group of engineers started an electrical engineering experiment on one of the 4 reactors.
They had very little knowledge or reactor physics, and their experiment was poorly planned and executed. Then on April 26th, the reactor failed to do what they were testing, and to prevent a meltdown, the operators reinserted all 200 control rods at once. This caused a chemical explosion which released more than 50 tons of radioactive material.
A cover-up was attempted, but the major nuclear accident that occurred was acknowledged. The lasting effects were extreme. An estimated 5,000 eventually died from radiation-induced illnesses, and it caused a lot of deformities in future children that were born. In 2000, the last working reactors at Chernobyl were shut down and the plant was officially closed. During the Iran hostage crisis, over 60 Americans were held hostage for 444 days in Iran. They were first taken on November 4th, 1979, and then finally released on January 21st, 1981, just minutes after Reagan gave his inaugural address.
The crisis we're facing today does not require of us the kind of sacrifice that Martin Treptow and so many thousands of others were called upon to make. It does require, however, our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds, to believe that together, with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. God bless you and thank you.
Those were definitely the most terrifying 444 days of my life, to the max. We were in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and then a group of Iranian students stormed in and took 60 of us. We had to stay chilled or those dudes would have killed us. It is believed that this happened because President Carter let the Shah go to America for cancer treatment. He was expelled from the country before that. It was also a way for the students to dramatically declare a break with Iran's past and an end to the American interference in its affairs. When we were released, though, we were definitely booking it out of there.
In 1984, the Summer Olympics were held in Los Angeles, California. The Soviet Union and 13 other communist countries decided to boycott this event. The Soviet Union said it was to keep their athletes safe from possible protests and physical attacks. But everyone knew that was totally bogus. Most believe the boycott was in response to the United States boycotting the 1980 Games in Moscow.
It was totally strange not having 14 countries here at the Games. It really affected the outcome of events. Usually the Soviet Union and East Germany win a lot of medals, but without them here, the United States broke an Olympic record of winning 83 gold medals. How wickedly excellent is that?
The 1984 Summer Olympics were also the first Olympics China had participated in since 1952. Luckily, the boycott had small diplomatic impact. As you can see, these events occurred because choices were made, some good and some bad. Every one of these set the course for the 90s, and we are still feeling the repercussions today. In the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan, Hinckley made the choice to make an attempt at taking the president's life. This affects today's life because the Secret Service changed their security procedures to ensure the president's safety. With the Challenger disaster, the people in the shuttle program chose to put a teacher on the shuttle, and the death of this teacher affected many Americans. This disaster made us what we are today because now the shuttles are more advanced, so accidents like that will never happen again. The people at Motorola chose to create the first handheld cellular device. This decision led to what society is today because cell phones are such a big part of people's lives today, and they can do so much more than allow you to talk to each other now. The choice the engineers made to shut off the safety systems on the reactor is what led to the terrible disaster in Chernobyl. That choice affects today because now it is nearly impossible to start a new nuclear power plant due to government rules that were made. The Iranians chose to take those 60 Americans hostage, and they chose to let them free after Reagan became president. This crisis greatly affected America's Middle East policy and how they deal with countries over in that region today. And finally, it was the Soviet Union's decision to boycott the Summer Olympics in 1984. This represents the Cold War, and even though the Iron Curtain fell in the early 1990s, we are still seeing Russia trying to rebuild itself and spread communism today. I hope you've enjoyed our documentary and that you've learned a lot about how the choices that were made in the 1980s are what made us what we are today.